I have had some of the best days of my life in prison. I've been taught how to win chess in 3 moves by a long-timer. I've enjoyed numerous prison meals. I've watched rap battles where the freestyles were on fire. I've learnt new card games. I've had D&Ms over sugary cups of tea. And I've been made fun of for my crappy basketball skills. But when I say I've had some of the best days of my life in prison, this comes from someone that's able to leave at the end of the day. And I say this with recognition of the huge privilege that comes with that statement, knowing that it's most likely not the best days for the people staying there. Okay, so by now you might be getting curious about what I'm doing in prisons then, so let me give you some context. I am a health researcher, and the types of health research that I do is mostly in justice settings. So for the last 11 years, I've been working in prisons and detention centres. Recently, I've been focusing on the youth justice space. So I've been hanging out in the youth detention centre here in Western Australia, and I was even given permission to spend full 12-hour days shadowing the staff and observing across all areas of the centre, where there are some kids as young as 10 and some as old as 18. That could be the same age as some of you. In fact, these kids could be your mates from school, or maybe not, because these kids are often labelled when they're at school. The naughty kids, the attention seekers, the lazy one, the kid who is always choosing to misbehave or piss off the teacher, the ones your parents might have told you to avoid, the bad kids. What did you think about the bad kids at school? When they're in detention, they're automatically labelled bad kids. And yeah, they are there because they've been either accused or found guilty of a crime. And some of them are serious crimes, yes, but some not so serious. I recently worked on a large study with a whole team of health professionals and researchers, and we undertook the most comprehensive assessments of kids in detention and their brains, how they were functioning, what they were good at, what their strengths were, and where they were struggling or where they might need additional support. And what our team were shocked to find was an unprecedented amount of brain impairments. We had 4 different types of health clinician in our team. So we had a paediatrician, a neuropsychologist, a speech and language pathologist, and an occupational therapist. And it's not every day that a team that big works together in this way. It's quite rare, and that's what made our study one of the most comprehensive in the world. We also worked with interpreters to make sure that kids were always assessed in their first language. Now, this team worked together to look at 9 different areas of our brain function. So this includes things like memory, attention, social skills, communication, motor skills, and understanding of cause and effect or consequences for our actions. We all have these things happening in our brains at different times and different levels, and they help us interact with the world every single day. Our team were also able to pick up if the young person might have a neurodisability. Some of these disabilities you might be familiar with. These are things like intellectual disability, ADHD, language disorder. But there are some that you might not have heard of, like FASD. That's FASD, or fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. FASD is a lifelong disability that can happen when a fetus is exposed to alcohol during pregnancy. And in fact, after doing these comprehensive assessments with 99 young people in detention, we found that 36% of them had FASD. 36%. That's over 1/3. And that figure is actually the highest rate of FASD that's ever been found in a justice setting worldwide. And of that 36%, only 2 young people had their FASD recognised prior to our study. And that wasn't because of any engagement with services like school or justice or health. No, that was just because they'd been in other research studies before ours. So talk about kids slipping through the cracks, right? But that rate of FASD, that was not even the most shocking finding of our research. What shocked our team was that regardless of whether or not these kids had FASD, almost all of them had a brain impairment. So for all 99 that we assessed, 89%, or 9 in 10, met severe impairment in at least one area of brain function. 9 in 10, just in one area. Most of the young people had multiple impairments at once. So 65% of the kids severely impaired in 3 or more areas, 23% of the kids severely impaired in 5 or more areas, and some young people impaired in 7 areas all at once. And when I say severe, I do really mean it. So we're not just talking about a little bit of difficulty here. We're talking about kids who are functioning well below what's expected for someone the same age. And speaking of age and what's expected, it's really important to be aware of the different types of age that can coexist within us. So we have our chronological age, how many laps of the sun that we've done, and then we have our developmental age, which is how our brain is actually functioning. Just because a young person might look 15 and might be 15 doesn't mean that they're able to act like a typically developed 15-year-old might be able to. So we're talking about a population of young people who are not typically developed, but they've been engaged with all of these systems that expect them to act in a way as if they were. They have sat in countless police interviews and court proceedings without having their disabilities recognised or accommodated for. There have been decisions made for them without them. And every single one of these impairments has implications for how that young person is processing through the justice system, how they are understanding it and how they're being understood. So for example, how well can a young person remember and relay a story when asked during a police interview? Or comprehend what they've just agreed to in the courtroom? Or follow instructions given by staff once they're inside detention? Or stick to rules that they have to after release, like a curfew or rocking up for compulsory appointments? And it's not simply that they just won't do these things. Maybe they can't. I've watched kids be given a set of rules that their future might depend on, and after this big long list is read out, they're asked if they understood. And of course, they nod and say yes in that moment, but in reality, they haven't comprehended it at all. And we will see kids go in and out of justice involvement because of this. And nothing ever changes for them. So it's pretty critical that their needs are understood at every stage of justice involvement. And until we do this, we will continue to set kids up for failure and waste a whole lot of time and money while we do it. But did these problems just start for the young people once they entered the justice system? Of course not. No, they start much, much earlier. So all of these kids have had contact with school at some stage. They've been engaged with health services, community programs, some with child protection. And all of those services had an opportunity to identify these kids' needs and figure out ways to support them. But for whatever reasons, they didn't. We hear of so many kids as young as year 1 and year 2 getting suspended and expelled for challenging behaviours that are later found out to be associated with unrecognised and unsupported disability. And until these kids have their needs recognised, they will continue to be labelled the naughty kids at school. You might be able to think of one or many who was given this kind of label at school, or it might have been you. And it can be so easy to judge that naughty kid, to write them off as bad, weird, annoying, never gonna make it. But how often do we take a moment to stop those judgments and assumptions and start to get curious instead? Curious about what could be going on for that naughty kid, about what they are experiencing or the reasons behind their behaviour. Because the reality is, even right now in this moment, we are all experiencing the world differently. We all have different sensory needs, things like lights, sounds, colours, textures, smells. They all shape the way our brain is processing information and what we're able to take in. Me, for example, I hate too much noise. I find it incredibly irritating. So if I have the TV on and someone tries to talk to me, one of those things better mute quite quickly. And usually I hope it's not the TV. But I share this because the more that we can normalise these conversations about how these differences exist, the more that we are opening up space for those who might have had those differences misunderstood or judged in the past. Because regardless of who you are, whether you're a student in a classroom, a teacher, a parent, a police officer conducting an interview, or a judge making life-altering decisions in the courtroom, we could all get a little more curious. Curious about the naughty kids in our lives, those that we can't understand, those who have been labelled bad kids. What else could be going on for them? And even in the most extreme cases, let's let go of our judgments and assumptions and instead stay curious. Thank you.